When a racist cop pulled over a Rolls-Royce and arrested a black woman for no reason, he was completely unaware that she was Shaq O'Neal's mother, a mistake he would soon deeply regret. The sun had barely crested the horizon when Shaquille O'Neal eased his gleaming Rolls-Royce onto the quiet streets of Macon, Georgia. The luxury vehicle purred softly, a testament to both his success and the journey that lay ahead. Today wasn't just any day. It carried a weight of purpose that Shaq felt in his very bones. Beside him sat his mother, Lucille O'Neal, her presence a comforting constant in his life. They were headed to the Atlanta Civic Center for an event titled Voices of Inspiration, Overcoming Adversity. The name alone stirred something within Shaq, reminding him of the obstacles he and his mother had faced and conquered together. As they cruised through the awakening city, Shaq glanced at his mother. "You ready for this, Ma?" he asked, his deep voice tinged with a mix of excitement and reverence. Lucille smiled, her eyes twinkling with pride. "Always ready, baby. This is important work we're doing." They fell into an easy conversation about their roles as keynote speakers. The event they were headed to wasn't just another speaking engagement. It was a platform to empower black voices and celebrate those who'd made significant contributions to their communities while overcoming racial and societal challenges. It was a topic close to both their hearts. "Remember when we first moved to Newark?" Lucille asked, her voice taking on a nostalgic tone. "Those early days weren't easy, but look at us now." Shaq nodded, memories flooding back. "You always made sure I had what I needed, even when times were tough. That's what I want to talk about today. How your strength shaped me." Their conversation flowed naturally between memories and the impact they hoped to make through their live interview. They discussed growing up, facing discrimination, and using their platform for advocacy. It was a dialogue filled with laughter, moments of solemnity, and an underlying current of determination to make a difference. "You know, Ma," Shaq said, his tone growing serious, "I've been thinking about what to say about facing discrimination. It's not always the big, obvious things. Sometimes it's the small stuff that chips away at you." Lucille nodded, her expression thoughtful. "That's right, baby. And that's what people need to hear. It's not just about the headlines. It's about the everyday battles we fight." As they delved deeper into their discussion, the clock on the dashboard blinked to 8:45 a.m. Suddenly, Shaq's phone buzzed with an insistent reminder. His eyes widened slightly as he remembered the important business call he had scheduled with Coach Mike Krzyzewski, better known as Coach K. "Oh, shoot," Shaq muttered, reaching for his phone. "I almost forgot about the call with Coach K." Lucille raised an eyebrow. "Business call?" Shaq nodded, his brow furrowing slightly. "Yeah, it's about that youth mentorship program we've been working on. It's important, but—" He trailed off, glancing at his mother. Lucille, ever practical, noticed the concern etched on her son's face. She knew how significant this call was, especially given Coach Mike Krzyzewski's involvement. Lucille, ever the practical problem solver, didn't miss a beat. "Well, why don't you let me drive? That way you can focus on your call without worrying about the road." Shaq hesitated, his protective instincts kicking in. "I don't know, Ma, you sure about that?" But Lucille was already unbuckling her seatbelt. "Shaquille," she said, using his full name in that tone that brooked no argument. "Do you know how many accidents are caused by people driving while on phone calls? I'm not having my son become a statistic. Pull over." Despite his initial resistance, Shaq knew better than to argue with his mother when she used that tone. They pulled over to the side of the road, and Shaq reluctantly got out of the driver's seat. "Now get in the back," Lucille instructed as she settled behind the wheel. "You'll be able to focus better." This time Shaq did put up a fight. "Ma, I can't sit in the back while you drive. What if someone sees us when we get to Atlanta? They'll think I'm making you chauffeur me around." Lucille conceded this point with a chuckle. All right, front seat it is, but you better give that call your full attention." As they settled back into the car, roles reversed, Shaq couldn't help but smile. Even now, with all his success, his mother still had a way of taking charge when it mattered most. The Rolls-Royce merged back onto the street, now under Lucille's capable hands, as they continued their journey towards Atlanta and the important day that lay ahead. The Rolls-Royce glided smoothly onto Interstate 75 southbound, its polished exterior gleaming under the morning sun. Long shadows stretched across the wide highway, marking the early hour. Road signs flashed by, indicating the roughly 2-hour journey that lay ahead to Atlanta. Traffic flowed with unusual ease, creating perfect conditions for their drive. As Lucille settled into the rhythm of highway driving, Shaq couldn't help but issue a gentle warning from the passenger seat. "Ma, you know the Georgia State Patrol is pretty vigilant along this stretch, right?" Lucille's laugh filled the car, a warm, rich sound that never failed to bring a smile to Shaq's face. "Boy, who do you think taught you to drive? I was handling cars long before you could reach the pedals. Don't you worry about me." Her confidence was evident in the steady control she maintained over the luxury vehicle. The Rolls-Royce responded to her touch as if it had been designed for her hands alone. "I bet I'm driving smoother than that chauffeur of yours," Lucille teased, her eyes twinkling with mischief. Shaq chuckled, shaking his head. All right, I know when I'm beat. Mom knows best, right?" As the clock on the dashboard ticked closer to 9 a.m., Lucille glanced at her son. "It's almost time for your call, baby. Don't keep Coach K waiting." With a nod, Shaq initiated the call through the car's integrated system. The crisp sound of ringing filled the cabin, a testament to the vehicle's premium speakers. After a few moments, Coach Mike Krzyzewski's voice greeted them. "Shaq, good to hear from you," Coach K's familiar voice greeted him. "Coach, thanks for taking the time," Shaq replied, settling into business mode. "I'm excited to discuss this youth mentorship program." As the two men exchanged pleasantries, Lucille couldn't help but feel a swell of pride. Her son, now discussing important business matters with one of the most respected figures in basketball, it was a far cry from their humble beginnings. The conversation quickly turned to the youth mentorship program they were developing. Shaq's voice took on a passionate tone as they delved into the details of the program aimed at supporting underprivileged kids in underserved communities. Shaq felt a surge of passion. This was the kind of work that truly mattered to him, a chance to give back and make a real difference. "We're looking at a comprehensive approach," Coach K explained. "Not just basketball skills, but life skills, academic support, and community engagement." Shaq nodded, even though Coach K couldn't see him. That's exactly what these kids need, a holistic approach that prepares them for life, not just sports. "I really believe we can make a difference here, Coach," Shaq said, his enthusiasm palpable. Coach K's voice crackled through the speakers, equally passionate. "Absolutely, Shaq. Your experiences, your journey, that's exactly what these young people need to hear. Now let's talk about the specifics of your role as program spokesperson." As they delved into the details, promotional video filming, scheduled visits to Atlanta area schools, Lucille listened with rapt attention. Her son spoke eloquently about helping young people overcome discrimination, drawing from his own experiences and upbringing. The conversation then shifted to sponsorship details and specific commitments, with Shaq's agreement to take on a prominent role in the program, sparking enthusiasm from Coach K. "You know, Coach," Shaq said, his voice filled with conviction, "I look at these kids, and I see myself. I know what it's like to face discrimination, to feel like the odds are stacked against you. But I also know what a difference it can make when someone believes in you, when you have the right support and opportunities." From the projects of Newark to this luxury car on a Georgia highway, discussing ways to give back and make a difference, it was a testament to their shared strength and determination. As they continued to brainstorm and plan, the miles flew by unnoticed. The Georgia landscape rolled past their windows, a blur of green and gold in the morning light. Lucille maintained a steady pace, her driving as smooth and controlled as ever. The Rolls-Royce glided smoothly along I-75, carrying mother and son toward Atlanta as the morning sun rose higher, heralding a bright day ahead. The gentle hum of the car's engine and the rhythmic cadence of the highway had lulled Shaq into a calm focus. He was engaged in a group call with his management team and assistant this time, deep in discussion with Coach K about the details of the mentorship program. Suddenly, The serene atmosphere was abruptly interrupted by the piercing wail of police sirens. Shaq's head snapped up, his eyes immediately drawn to the rearview mirror where blue lights flashed ominously, their reflection dancing across the polished surface of the luxury vehicle. For a moment, he hoped the patrol car was after someone else, but as Lucille began to slow down, reality set in. "Coach, I'm sorry for the noise," Shaq said quickly, his fingers already working to transfer the call from the car's speaker to his personal earbuds. "Is everything all right?" Coach K's concern was evident even through the phone's speaker. "I'm sure it's fine," Shaq replied, trying to keep his voice steady as he watched his mother guide the car to the shoulder. "We're on our way to an event in Atlanta and got pulled over. It's probably just a routine check. Lucille is handling it." As Lucille brought the Rolls-Royce to a stop, she turned to Shaq with a reassuring smile. "Don't worry, baby. I'll handle this quickly. It's probably nothing. You stay focused on your call." Shaq nodded, but he couldn't shake the unease that had settled in his stomach. He watched as his mother reached for her license and registration from the glove compartment, her movements deliberate and controlled. Despite the situation, she maintained her composure, a skill Shaq had always admired in her. He decided to continue his discussion with Team. The crunch of gravel under heavy boots signaled the approach of the officer. Shaq tried to focus on Coach K's voice in his ear, discussing the finer points of their agreement, but his attention was split between the call and the unfolding situation outside the car. A tall officer emerged from the patrol car, his movements slow and deliberate. The morning sun glinted off his badge as he approached the driver's side, his hand resting casually near his holster. As he peered into the luxury vehicle, his eyes narrowing and expression hardened, a change that didn't go unnoticed by either Shaq or Lucille. Lucille rolled down her window, greeting the officer with practiced politeness. "Good morning, officer. Is something wrong?" The officer's response came clipped and dismissive, a stark contrast to Lucille's warm greeting. "License and registration," he demanded, not bothering to return her greeting or answer her question. "Yes, sir," Lucille complied, handing over the requested documents with a steady hand, maintaining her composure. "May I ask why we've been stopped?" she inquired, her voice calm but firm. The officer's eyes narrowed slightly. "Do you know why I pulled you over?" "No, I don't," Lucille replied honestly. "Was I speeding? I've been careful to adhere to the speed limit." The officer's next words came as a surprise to both Lucille and Shaq. "You were driving recklessly, swerving in and out of lanes in the morning traffic." Shaq, still on his call but listening intently to the exchange, felt a surge of indignation. He knew his mother's driving had been nothing but careful and steady. The accusation was so far from the truth that it bordered on absurd. Lucille's response was measured, her years of experience in handling difficult situations evident in her tone. "I don't believe that's correct, officer. I've been careful to stay within my lane and the speed limit. Perhaps there's been some misunderstanding." "Are you arguing with me?" The officer's cold expression hardened further at Lucille's explanation. It was clear he interpreted her calm denial as argumentative, despite her respectful tone. "Not at all, sir, just clarifying." As the morning traffic continued to flow past them, with occasional vehicles slowing to observe the tense scene, Shaq found it increasingly difficult to concentrate on his group call. He glanced up from his notes, watching the interaction briefly before trying to resume his work. He'd seen his mother handle situations like this with grace before, and he trusted her ability to resolve this quickly. But then, a raised voice snapped him out of his focus entirely. The officer's tone had shifted, becoming sharp and aggressive. "Step out of the vehicle," he commanded, his voice leaving no room for argument. Shaq's head shot up, alarm spreading across his face. He watched as his mother slowly unbuckled her seatbelt, her movements careful and deliberate. "What's going on? May I ask why I need to leave the vehicle?" Lucille questioned, her voice still calm but with an edge of concern. "I said step out of the vehicle now, with your hands where I can see them." The officer's response was immediate and harsh. In that moment, Shaq knew this was no ordinary traffic stop. He quickly ended his call with Coach K and his team, apologizing and promising to reschedule. As he put down his phone, he realized that what had started as a routine journey had suddenly taken a dangerous and unexpected turn. The peaceful morning had transformed into a tense confrontation, and Shaq found himself facing a situation that would require all of his and his mother's strength and composure to navigate. The tension in the air was palpable as Lucille slowly opened the car door, her movements deliberate and non-threatening. She stood tall, her demeanor calm but her eyes questioning the unnecessary aggression. Shaq watched with growing alarm, his imposing frame still seated in the passenger side, unsure of how to proceed without escalating the situation further. "Ma'am, turn around and put your hands behind your back," the officer commanded, his voice harsh and unyielding. Lucille's voice was steady as she responded, "Officer, I don't understand. I've done nothing wrong. I assure you I haven't been swerving between lanes. Can you please explain why I'm being treated this way?" Her question was met with sudden, unnecessary force. The officer roughly grabbed her arm, twisting it behind her back. Lucille let out a cry of pain, the sound piercing through the morning air and cutting straight to Shaq's heart. "Hey, what are you doing? Let go of me!" Lucille's voice cracked with indignation. Unable to contain himself any longer, Shaq quickly exited the vehicle, his protective instincts kicking in. "Hey, what are you doing? That's my mother," he called out, his deep voice carrying across the roadside. The sound of handcuffs clicking shut around Lucille's wrists filled the air as Shaq approached, his imposing frame drawing the immediate attention of both officers. The second officer, who had been hanging back, now stepped forward, his hand hovering near his holster. "Sir, step back. This doesn't concern you," the first officer warned, one hand still gripping Lucille, while the other hovered near his weapon. His partner caught up next to him, gauging his next move. "Like hell it doesn't," Shaq snapped, striding toward them, his sheer size and presence impossible to ignore. "That's my mother you're manhandling, and I'm Shaquille O'Neal. She wasn't driving recklessly. What are you doing to her?" "This woman was driving recklessly," the officer replied curtly, his grip on Lucille tightening. "And I don't like her attitude. Now, as I said, step back or you're under arrest too." Shaq's jaw clenched, his hands balling into fists at his sides. His mother looked at him, her face a mix of fear and pain. Shaq realized this wasn't just about his mother's driving. This was about something far uglier, a systemic issue that he had hoped to address in his speech later that day, not experience firsthand on the side of a Georgia highway. Shaq stood his ground, his heart pounding with a mixture of fury and disbelief. "Do you even know who you're messing with?" The first officer smirked, unmoved by Shaq's celebrity status. "Doesn't matter who you are, step back or you're under arrest." "You can't just detain us for no reason," Shaq growled, his voice dangerously low. "You have no proof of any wrongdoing. I was in the car with her. She wasn't driving recklessly," Shaq growled, his voice low and dangerous. "Let her go, now." The second officer advanced toward Shaq, handcuffs in hand. "Sir, we've warned you. If you don't step back, I'll have to detain you as well," the officer warned firmly. But Shaq wasn't about to stand by and allow his mother to be treated unfairly. He stepped forward, attempting once again to reason with them, but before he could get far, the officer cut him off. "That's it. You're under arrest for interfering with a police investigation." As the cold metal closed around Shaq's wrists, he exchanged a look with his mother. Lucille's eyes were filled with a mixture of fear and resignation, a look he had never wanted to see on her face. This was supposed to be a day of inspiration, of sharing their story of overcoming adversity. Instead, they found themselves living through another chapter of that very struggle. The officers roughly guided Shaq and Lucille towards separate patrol cars, their treatment a stark contrast to the respect and admiration Shaq was accustomed to receiving. As they were placed in the back seats, Shaq caught a glimpse of another officer getting into their Rolls-Royce. The doors slammed shut, and Shaq found himself with her mother in the back of a police cruiser, unsure of what would happen next. The irony of the situation wasn't lost on him. Here he was, a successful athlete and businessman, being treated like a common criminal because of the color of his skin. As the patrol car pulled away from the roadside, Shaq's mind raced. He knew they had done nothing wrong, but he also knew that in situations like these, the truth didn't always matter. He thought about the speech he was supposed to give later that day, about overcoming adversity and making a difference in the world. Little did he know that this experience would become a powerful, albeit unwanted, addition to that narrative. The morning sun, once warm and promising, now felt harsh and unforgiving even inside the police cab. The Georgia landscape flew by outside the window, but Shaq barely noticed it. His thoughts were with his mother, hoping she was okay, and with the countless others who had faced similar situations without the resources or platform he possessed. As they headed towards the local police station, Shaq made a silent vow to himself and to his mother. This incident would not be swept under the rug. They would use this experience to shed light on the ongoing issues of racial profiling and police misconduct, turning this moment of injustice into a catalyst for change. The ride to the local police station was tense and silent. Shaq and Lucille could only exchange worried glances as they were transported. "You'll regret treating my mother this way," he said, his voice low but filled with conviction. The officer driving scoffed. "That's a charge for threatening an officer. You'd be better off keeping quiet, or we'll add it to your list." Shaq bit back a retort, knowing that escalating the situation further wouldn't help their cause. Instead, he focused on controlling his breathing, trying to calm the storm of emotions raging inside him. Upon arriving at the station, the full weight of their situation became apparent. The police station loomed before them, a stark, concrete building that seemed to embody the cold, impersonal nature of their treatment. Shaq and Lucille were ushered out of the patrol car, the officers maintaining a firm grip on their arms despite their complete compliance. Inside, the fluorescent lights cast a harsh glow over the booking area. The process was deliberately slow, each step drawn out as if to prolong their discomfort. Fingerprints were taken, mugshots snapped, and personal belongings catalogued despite having committed no crime. The embarrassment of the situation weighed heavily on both of them, particularly as they were led through the procedures usually reserved for actual criminals. When asked for their statements, Shaq initially attempted to explain the situation calmly. "There's been a misunderstanding," he began, his deep voice resonating in the small room. "We were simply driving to Atlanta for an event. There was no reckless driving or any other violation." However, as he watched the initial officer who had detained Lucille embellish the story, adding details that were blatantly false, Shaq's jaw clenched. He made a quick decision. "On second thought, I'd like to exercise my right to remain silent," he stated firmly. Lucille, always the voice of reason, followed suit. "I too will remain silent until we can speak with our lawyer," she added, her dignity intact despite the circumstances. The officers, seemingly frustrated by their refusal to engage, separated mother and son into different detention cells. It was a clear divide-and-conquer tactic, designed to increase their distress and possibly provoke a reaction. As Shaq was led to his cell, he called out to his mother, "Don't worry, Ma, we'll get through this. I promise I'll find a solution." An officer roughly shoved him forward. "Keep quiet unless you want to spend the weekend here as a lesson." In his cell, Shaq paced the small space, his mind racing. He knew they needed legal representation, and fast. But just as he was about to request his right to make phone call, he heard the officers talking in a distance, in what they thought were hushed tones. Shaq sat on the hard bench and staring at the floor, pretending not to listen, but their words carried clearly to his ears. "Their kind isn't welcome in this city," one officer muttered. His partner replied, "Shame this one's rich and probably has a lawyer. Otherwise, we could have asked for some settlement money to make this all go away." "You idiot," the first one hissed. "You stopped a Rolls-Royce. Of course they're loaded. Bribes won't work on these types." The other officer chuckled darkly. "Hey, you never know. Sometimes these people like to pretend they're rich, renting fancy cars and stuff. How was I supposed to know this one was actually loaded when I saw the woman driving?" Their conversation then devolved into crude jokes about Shaq's size and his mother's small stature, wondering aloud how someone so petite could have given birth to such a giant. Each word they spoke fueled the fire burning in Shaq's chest. The casual racism, the admission of past bribes, the mockery of his family. It all painted a clear picture of the systemic issues plaguing this department. As he sat there, listening to their unprofessional and prejudiced comments, Shaq's resolve strengthened. He knew then that this wasn't just about him and his mother anymore. This was about every person who had ever been wrongly detained, every individual who had faced discrimination at the hands of those sworn to protect and serve. Shaq realized that he had an opportunity, no, a responsibility, to use this experience to shine a light on these injustices. As the laughter of the officers faded down the hallway, Shaq began to formulate a plan. He wouldn't let this incident slide. He wouldn't accept a quiet apology or a hasty release. No, he would use every resource at his disposal to ensure that what happened today would have lasting consequences, not for him and his mother, but for the officers who thought they could abuse their power with impunity. As the time ticked by in the cold, sterile cell, Shaq's mind raced with possibilities. He knew that simply accepting this injustice wasn't an option, not for him, not for his mother, and not for countless others who faced similar treatment without the resources to fight back. With renewed determination, Shaq settled in for what he knew would be a long day. But as he glanced across the hallway to where he knew his mother was being held, he felt a surge of strength. It was time to turn the tables and teach these officers a powerful lesson. When the opportunity for his phone call finally came, Shaq didn't hesitate. He dialed the number of his lawyer, Anderson Thornhill, from a memory. He's relieved when the call was answered promptly. "Anderson, it's Shaq," he said, his voice low and urgent. "I need you at the police station just outside of Macon. My mother and I have been arrested under false pretenses. It's complicated. We need you here as soon as possible." His lawyer's response was immediate and reassuring. "I'm on my way, Shaq. Don't say anything more to the officers. I'll be there within the hour." True to his word, Anderson arrived quickly, his presence immediately changing the dynamic in the station. The officers' demeanor shifted subtly, their bravado diminishing in the face of legal scrutiny. However, just as the police suspected the lawyers here to release Shaq and Lucille, they were taken surprised when Shaq told them he just wanted to have a word to his lawyer. "Make it quick," the officer said, leading him to a small room and closed the door behind them. "Shaq, what's going on?" Mr. Anderson asked immediately. Quickly and concisely, Shaq explained the situation, the wrongful stop, the unnecessary force, the thinly veiled racism they'd encountered. As he spoke, he could almost hear the gears turning in Mr. Anderson's head. "I have an idea," Shaq continued, "but I need your help to make it happen. Can you contact the event organizers in Atlanta, explain the situation, and tell them I won't make it to the event? But here's the key. I want to propose conducting our scheduled interview right outside this police station instead." Mr. Anderson's voice was thoughtful when he replied, "That's bold, Shaq. You're talking about turning this incident into a very public statement." "Exactly," Shaq affirmed. "These officers thought they could intimidate us, humiliate us. But we're going to use this to expose the systemic discrimination that's happening right under everyone's noses. We'll create a permanent record of this incident that can't be swept under the rug." There was a moment of silence as Mr. Anderson considered the implications. "It's risky," he said finally, "but it could be incredibly powerful." "Are you sure about this?" Shaq's response was immediate and resolute. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life." As the officer returned to bring him back to his cell, Shaq felt a mix of anticipation and determination coursing through him. He knew the next few hours would be crucial. He caught a glimpse of his mother in the hallway as he was led back. Their eyes met, and he gave her a small nod, trying to convey that help was on the way. Back in his cell, Shaq settled in to wait. He knew that Mr. Anderson would work quickly, but coordinating with the event organizers and setting up an impromptu interview outside a police station would take time. As the minutes ticked by, he focused on maintaining his composure, knowing that his and his mother's dignified behavior would stand in stark contrast to the officer's unprofessional conduct. Hours passed, marked only by the occasional sound of footsteps in the hallway or the distant slam of a door. Shaq used the time to mentally prepare, running through the key points he wanted to make when the cameras started rolling. This wasn't just about him and his mother anymore. It was about shining a light on a systemic issue that affected countless individuals every day. As the afternoon wore on, Shaq heard a commotion near the front of the station. Straining his ears, he could make out raised voices and the unmistakable sound of camera equipment being set up. A smile tugged at the corners of his mouth. Mr. Anderson had come through. The plan was in motion. What had started as a humiliating and unjust detention was about to become a powerful platform for change. Shaq stood up, straightening his clothes as best he could. He was ready to face the cameras, to tell their story, and to demand accountability. As he waited for the officers to come and fetch him, Shaq's resolve only grew stronger. This was more than just a response to one incident. It was a chance to effect real change, and he was determined to make every word count. The commotion at the front of the station grew louder, and Shaq could hear the distinct voices of the interview team arriving. He listened intently as police officers tried to manage the situation, their voices tinged with confusion and growing alarm. "Take your equipment and cameras outside," one officer barked. "No cameras inside the station." Shaq heard the shuffling of feet and equipment as the crew was pushed towards the exit, but they weren't going quietly. "We're here to interview Shaquille O'Neal," a determined voice insisted. "We have every right to be here." The tension in the air was palpable, even from Shaq's isolated position in the cell. He could hear the officers debating amongst themselves, clearly unprepared for this turn of events. "What do we do if they don't leave?" one officer asked nervously. "This could be the end of us if Mr. Hans finds out," another replied, referring to their superior. Amidst the chaos, Shaq recognized a familiar voice, Mr. Anderson, his lawyer. The attorney's calm, authoritative tone cut through the confusion. "Gentlemen," Mr. Anderson said firmly, "these reporters have every right to film on public property outside the station building. However, if you're concerned about the attention this is drawing, I suggest you bring Mr. O'Neal out to speak with them. He can ask them to leave, and this whole situation can be resolved quietly." There was a moment of tense silence, then hurried footsteps approached Shaq's cell. The door opened, revealing two officers, their faces a mix of frustration and uncertainty. "All right, O'Neal," one of them said gruffly. "We're willing to offer you a deal. We'll release you tomorrow instead of keeping you over the weekend if you cooperate in removing those crews." Shaq stood slowly, his imposing frame filling the small cell. He kept his expression neutral, not wanting to reveal his hand just yet. "I'll need these cuffs off," he said calmly. "You still have my mother here. I'm not going anywhere." The officers exchanged glances, then one reluctantly moved to remove the handcuffs. As the metal fell away from his wrists, Shaq rolled his shoulders, feeling a small sense of victory. As they led him towards the exit, one officer couldn't resist a final taunt. "Next time, don't let your mama drive, big guy. Drive yourself." Shaq stopped in his tracks, turning to face the officer. His voice was low and controlled, but there was no mistaking the intensity in his eyes. "Is it going to be any different if a black man is driving instead of a black woman?" The officer's smug expression faltered, unable to formulate a response. Shaq held his gaze for a moment longer, then turned and continued walking towards the exit. As they approached the door leading to the parking lot, Shaq could hear the buzz of reporters and see the glare of camera lights through the windows. He took a deep breath, squaring his shoulders. This was it, the moment to turn this injustice into a platform for change. The door swung open, and Shaq stepped out into the warm afternoon air. Camera lights immediately swung towards him, and a barrage of questions filled the air. But Shaq raised his hand, silencing the crowd with his commanding presence. This was no longer just about him and his mother. This was about every person who had ever been wrongly detained, every individual who had faced discrimination at the hands of those sworn to protect and serve. As he began to speak, Shaq knew that his words would carry far beyond this parking lot, shining a light on injustices that had been hidden in the shadows for far too long. The camera lights created an impromptu stage in front of the police station, their harsh glare illuminating Shaq's face as he stood before the gathered media. The reporters, initially buzzing with questions, fell silent as Shaq raised his hand, commanding their attention with his presence alone. "Good day," Shaq began, his deep voice carrying across the parking lot. "I was supposed to be speaking at an event in Atlanta tonight about overcoming adversity. I never imagined I'd be living out that very theme in such a literal way." He paused, letting his words sink in before continuing. "Today, my mother and I experienced firsthand the kind of systemic discrimination that plagues our justice system. What should have been a routine traffic stop, if it was even justified in the first place, turned into a display of prejudice, abuse of power, and blatant disregard for our rights as citizens. As Shaq recounted the events of the day, from the initial stop to their detention, the interviewer hung on every word. He didn't hold back, detailing the unnecessary force used against his mother, the baseless accusations and the demeaning treatment they received. But it wasn't just about what happened on the surface, Shaq continued, his voice growing more intense. It was about the whispered comments we weren't supposed to hear, comments about their kind not being welcome, jokes about bribes and racial stereotypes. This isn't just about one or two bad officers. This is about a culture of discrimination that runs deep. The reporter's pen scribbled furiously, and camera operators zoomed in, capturing every nuance of Shaq's powerful testimony. As he finished speaking, a moment of stunned silence fell over the crowd before questions erupted. "Mr. O'Neill, are you saying the officers explicitly made racist comments?" one reporter called out. Before Shaq could respond, a voice from behind him spoke up. "Yes, that's exactly what he's saying." The officers' faces paled at this revelation. One of them stepped forward, his voice tight with anger. "That's a lie. You have no proof of any of this. We'll press charges for defamation." As they spoke, the camera panned to capture the reactions of the officers standing nearby. Their faces were a mixture of discomfort and defiance. Just as the situation seemed on the verge of escalating, an unexpected voice cut through the tension. "Actually, they do have a witness." All heads turned to see a black police officer step out of the station. He introduced himself as Kenny Lynch, his voice steady despite the obvious nervousness in his stance. "My name is Officer Kenny Lynch," he said, his voice slightly shaky but growing stronger with each word, "and I can corroborate everything Mr. O'Neill has said. What happened today isn't an isolated incident. I've witnessed similar behavior from Officers Paul Martin and Donnie Craig on multiple occasions." A collective gasp went through the small crowd of interviewers. Officer Lynch's testimony added a new layer of credibility to Shaq's claims, and the reporter's questions came even faster. "Officer Lynch, why are you coming forward now?" someone asked. Kenny's face was a mix of shame and resolve. "Because I was wrong to keep silent before. I've seen this happen too many times and I can't stand by anymore. We're supposed to protect and serve all members of our community, not just some. What happened today? What the officers Paul Martin and Donnie Craig, the two who had arrested Shaq and Lucille, did. It's a disgrace to the badge we wear." The revelation sent shockwaves through the gathered crowd. The accused officers, Paul and Donnie, immediately went on the defensive. "You can't prove anything," Paul shouted, his face red with anger. "This is all hearsay and slender. We'll sue you all for this." Officer Craig chimed in, his voice equally hostile. "It's your word against ours, and who do you think people will believe?" Shaq stood tall, unfazed by their outburst. "The truth is its own proof," he said calmly, "and today the truth is being heard loud and clear." Their protests rang hollow in the face of Kenny's testimony and the composed accounts of Shaq and Lucille. The contrast between the officers' aggressive denials and the calm, factual statements from the others only served to make their guilt seem more apparent. The event had transformed from a simple interview into a powerful moment of truth-telling. Cameras captured every word, every reaction, as years of pent-up frustration and unaddressed issues came to light. It was clear that this story would not end here in the parking lot of a small-town police station. The ripples of this confrontation would spread far and wide, forcing a conversation that was long overdue. Shaq, Lucille, and Kenny stood together, a united front against the injustice they had witnessed and experienced. "We were lucky. We have resources, connections. But what about those who don't? How many voices go unheard? How many injustices go unchallenged because people don't have the means to fight back?" Shaq said. Suddenly the station doors swung open once more. A tall, distinguished-looking man in a crisp uniform stepped out, his face grave with the seriousness of the situation. This was Mr. Hans Kennedy, the station's department superior, and his presence immediately commanded attention. Mr. Hans surveyed the scene before him, his eyes taking in the interviewer's note and pen scribbling. the crowd of onlookers, and the tense standoff between his officers and the O'Neills. With a deep breath, he stepped forward. His first action spoke volumes. Without a word, he turned to an officer standing nearby and issued a quiet command. Moments later, Lucille O'Neill was escorted from the building, finally reunited with her son. The image of mother and son standing together, dignified despite their ordeal, was powerful. Mr. Hans cleared his throat, his voice carrying across the now silent parking lot. "Good afternoon, everyone. I am Chief Robert Hans, and I oversee this department. What has transpired here today is deeply troubling, and I want to assure you all that it will be addressed with the utmost seriousness." He paused, his gaze sweeping over the assembled crowd before landing on Officers Martin and Craig. "In light of the testimony we've heard and the corroboration from Officer Lynch, in addition to CCTV recording inside the station that we have investigated, I am taking immediate action. Officers Paul Martin and Donnie Craig, you are hereby relieved of duty, effective immediately. Please surrender your badges and firearms to Deputy Chief Johnson." A collective gasp went through the crowd. The swiftness and decisiveness of the action sent shockwaves through the assembled officers and onlookers alike. Officers Martin and Craig stood stunned, their earlier bravado evaporating in an instant. "But sir," Officer Martin sputtered, "you can't just—" "I can and I have," Mr. Hans cut him off firmly. "Your actions today, and apparently on previous occasions, are a disgrace to this department and to the oath you swore to uphold. We will be conducting a full investigation, and I assure you, if these allegations are proven true, your dismissal will be the least of your concerns." As the disgraced officers were led away, Mr. Hans turned to address the remaining police personnel. His voice carried clearly in the night air, every word captured by the rolling cameras. "Let this serve as a lesson to all of us," he began, his tone somber yet resolute. "The badge we wear and the power it represents is not a right but a privilege, one that can and will be revoked if abused. Our duty is to protect and serve all members of our community, regardless of race, status, or any other factor. Discrimination, abuse of power, and violation of citizens' rights have no place in this department or any other." He continued, his words carrying the weight of someone determined to effect real change. "Moving forward, we will be implementing additional training programs focused on racial sensitivity and de-escalation techniques. We will also be establishing an independent review board to investigate any future complaints of officer misconduct. The events of today have made it clear that we must do better, and we will do better." As Mr. Hans spoke, Shaq and Lucille stood side by side, their composed demeanor a powerful contrast to the chaos that had unfolded earlier. Their dignity in the face of injustice spoke volumes, far more impactful than any angry outburst could have been. Concluding his address, Mr. Hans turned to face Shaq and Lucille directly. He approached them, fishing a set of keys from his pocket. "Mr. O'Neill, Mrs. O'Neill," he said, his voice carrying a mix of regret and determination. "On behalf of this department, I offer you my deepest and most sincere apologies for the treatment you've endured today. Your composure and your willingness to shine a light on this issue is commendable." He held out the keys to their Rolls-Royce. "I hope you'll accept these as a small gesture of our remorse, along with my personal assurance that what happened today will serve as a catalyst for real, lasting change in our department." Shaq accepted the keys with a nod, his expression serious but not unkind. "Thank you, Chief Hans. We appreciate your swift action and your commitment to change. We hope that our experience today can indeed lead to improvements that will benefit all members of the community." As the impromptu event began to wind down, the gravity of what had transpired hung in the air. A routine traffic stop had transformed into a powerful moment of accountability, one that would likely reverberate far beyond the confines of this small police station. As the crowd began to disperse, the parking lot of the police station slowly emptied. Interviewers packed up their equipment, reporters made their final notes, and curious onlookers drifted away, discussing the day's extraordinary events in hushed tones. Through it all, Shaq and Lucille remained a picture of composure, their dignified presence a stark contrast to the chaos that had unfolded. Chief Hans approached them one last time, his face etched with a mixture of remorse and determination. "Mr. O'Neill, Mrs. O'Neill," he began, his voice low and sincere, "I want to apologize once again for the events of today. I give you my word that I will personally oversee the removal of your arrest records. It's the least we can do to begin making amends." Shaq nodded, his expression serious but not unkind. "We appreciate that, Chief. Thank you for taking our concerns seriously and for your commitment to change." As Chief Hans returned their personal belongings and walked them to their car, Lucille spoke up for the first time since their release. "Chief, I hope you understand that what happened to us today isn't an isolated incident. Many people face similar treatment, but don't have the resources or platform to fight back. We're counting on you to make sure this becomes a turning point, not just a momentary response to bad publicity." With final handshakes exchanged, Shaq and Lucille finally found themselves alone, standing beside their Rolls-Royce in the now quiet parking lot. The afternoon sun was beginning to dip towards the horizon, casting long shadows across the asphalt. As they settled into the familiar comfort of the luxury vehicle, a moment of silence fell between them. The events of the day weighed heavily on both their minds. Lucille was the first to break the silence. "Well, that certainly wasn't the day we had planned, was it?" she said, a hint of wry humor in her voice. Shaq couldn't help but chuckle, feeling some of the tension of the day release. "No, it definitely wasn't, Ma. But maybe it was the day that needed to happen." As Shaq started the engine, they both realized that their original plans for the day, the event in Atlanta, were no longer feasible. The question now was, where do they go from here? Lucille turned to her son, her eyes thoughtful. "You know, Shaquille, I've been thinking. Instead of heading back home, why don't we treat ourselves? I'm famished. Let's find someplace to wind down and take it all in." "You know what would make this trip perfect," Shaq said as they merged onto the highway. "Finding a good soul food restaurant. I could use some fried chicken, mac and cheese, and sweet tea after the day we've had." Lucille laughed, the sound filling the car with warmth. "Now that sounds like a plan I can get behind." As they cruised down the highway, the conversation flowed easily between them. They discussed the day's events, processing the trauma, but also recognizing the potential impact of their stand against injustice. They shared lighter moments too, reminiscing about family meals and childhood adventures. The ability to find joy and purpose, even in the face of adversity, was a testament to their bond and their resilience. As the miles rolled by, Shaq and Lucille knew that their journey, both literal and metaphorical, was far from over. But they were facing it together, armed with the strength of their convictions and the power of their voices.